The reason that I had a 30-year career in finance is because of Bangalore. I was born in a village and I went to a school where my mother was the principal. All I wanted to do was journalism and English literature. Nobody really took journalism seriously, at least in our little space. At the time I was a young girl and I wanted to live in a city and I wanted to live a fancy life, a glamorous life. I ended up writing the RBI exam. My performance report is not the best that it could be, because it wasn't based on performance only. It was based on the fact that I was not available
for 6 months.
If I was to solve everybody's regulatory problems, I should still have been in RBI. Why am I outside? So people used to ask me, what does it feel like to leave RBI? And I used to say, I feel like I've had a cataract surgery, because suddenly the world is clearer to me. When my mother got sick and I had to stop traveling, that was when this idea to make it into a book came to me. I told my mother, she says, just one clear direction, write an interesting book. And that just suddenly shifted everything in my head. So I believed traveling and meeting other women made me humbler and made me realize that barriers exist. But it also made me happy to explore and to understand how women are coping through these barriers. That's actually the most beautiful story in this book. The light belonged to the men, but the dark was freedom for the woman to step out. We're not living lives. We are constantly complying. You're a beautiful tree. You have very good education. You have very good training. You can speak great English. But you are allowed to grow like a bonsai plant. You can't grow like a wild mango tree and start having. But mangoes don't come from bonsais. Mangoes come from trees. I make him a tea first, and we have tea before I make dinner. If he drinks, will I keep him? I will send him back to Calcutta. She does not understand why any woman would suffer an indignity from a man when every woman is better than every man.
Good morning, Shinjini. Welcome to our little studio at Waterbridge Ventures and to our 5th season of our podcast series called That One Idea.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you for doing this early in the morning, and very, very excited to cover your 3 decades long journey, and you've worn multiple hats. I'll start with a very simple question. Most people, and women especially, pick a lane, but you didn't. So take us through and unravel your childhood for us, and who or what were your biggest influences growing up?
I didn't think about it like that when I was a child, because you're just absorbing what comes to you. So I didn't have like a conscious role model. Also, you have to remember that I was growing up in a very small place in Bihar. So I was born in a village, and I went to a school that was where my mother was the principal. My very young mother had become the principal, and the school was a Gandhian school founded by a fairly eminent Gandhian for girls. And we had a very interesting setup, which now is very fashionable because it had Sanskrit and gardening and sports and classical music and dance. But it was all in Hindi, and it was a very small school, 300 girls altogether, residential. Everybody was in the hostel. We, of course, lived at home because of my mother. And we lived in a little campus where there were other teachers and my mother. And growing up, we did not think about it, but looking back, my mother was very special. And my most enduring memories of my mother are us sitting in we had 2 rooms in our house, and us sitting in one room studying, because she had very strict timings for everything. You have to be sitting on your study table and reading. And my mother sitting in her room on her bed and reading literature. There was, and even till date, my father and till my mother passed away, you would never see them without a book on their side. So they were big readers. And we had a library in the school which also had beautiful literature, mostly in translation. So I read in Hindi, but I read global literature. So I remember reading Dr. Zhivago in Hindi. So I was reading Manto on the one side and Flaubert on the other side, all translated. Lot of Indian literature translated, Kannada literature, Tamil, Gujarati, Bangla. So there was this very strong influence of Indian classical literature on me growing up, which at the time I did not understand or value, but that's the only thing I knew. So in fact, on the other hand, when I was 14, 15, and I came to for my +2 to Patna. And for the first time, I was exposed to populations of people who were speaking in English. I thought English was the glamorous thing.
Yeah.
So I quickly changed sides and went to study in English.
Wow.
And then that became a passion.
Yeah.
So I finally graduated with an English literature. But I think this love for literature was a very important one. Also, this love for this country, I think, got ingrained in that Gandhian setup, and the love for nature. So the whole idea that, you know, my mother had a small garden, but each one of us had to nurture our own section of the garden, and there was like we did interesting things around with our hands, and so very different type of upbringing. But now when I look back, I realize that shaped a lot of my thinking in terms of having simplicity or clarity, or the idea that you know, best things in life are free. I think the biggest lesson I learned from my childhood is that the most valuable things in life actually don't come with money. Although you do realize that money is very important to living a dignified life, which was my lesson that I learned when I became independent. But childhood, yes, I think there was a lot of
lovely.
nice free stuff.
So I would say the master's in English literature then was maybe a straightforward path given your upbringing. But how did you land up in the RBI?
That's a little bit of a Bihari story. No, because you know, simple Bihari kids, there weren't that many opportunities to do things. The only thing I knew to do with English literature, I had figured that I wanted to be a journalist, and that also very quirkily, because Times of India was celebrating its 150th anniversary, and they had an essay competition, and I wrote an essay and I won a prize. And the prize was a T-shirt which said Times of India. I don't know how that's a prize, but that was the prize. So I got the T-shirt and I would very proudly wear it around. But that gave me an address to which I could write and ask that I want to be a journalist. What should I do? And so they kind of guided me. And one way or another, I ended up in Times of India's journalism school in Delhi. And I was very happy because that's what I wanted to do. All I wanted to do was journalism and English literature. But what had happened in the meanwhile is, while I was still in my final year in college, my brother was writing civil services, and he had, I mean, nobody really took journalism seriously. It was something that you, like, at least in our, you know, in our little space, nobody really understood the potential of being a journalist. So, not that my parents ever worried much about it, but there was also an idea to say, okay, why don't you write civil services? But I was very against that idea for whatever reasons. I don't think they were all valid reasons in retrospect, but at the time I was a young girl, and I wanted to live in a city, and I wanted to live a fancy life, a glamorous life. I didn't want to live the civil servant's life. So my brother was the one who suggested I write the RBI exam because I could get to live in a city. And the reason that I had a 30-year career in finance is because of Bangalore. Because when the RBI recruitment came, they were sending me to Bangalore. If they were sending me to Bhopal, nothing against Bhopal, I love the city, but 100% I would have continued with journalism and never left Delhi. But because it said Bangalore, I got so excited because I was this girl from a small place who was getting harassed in the DTC buses, and I really wanted to, like, you know, come and see a nice place. And Bangalore was quite fabled for being a very civilized and lovely place. So yes, I just didn't think much about it. I just
and you know, if I can call you the accidental economist from a journalist, that was a long stint, and that was almost like a career-defining stint, almost close to 17 years. Take us through what walking in the corridors of RBI meant in, you know, the early 2000s, late 90s. And also a few anecdotes about Bangalore, because today Bangalore's color has changed. It's the startup capital of the world, but few people know that it was called Pensioners Paradise, and we had leafy green, you know, walkways and pathways. But give us a quick synopsis, if it's even possible. Summarize the 17 years for us.
So I must give credit to the RBI for that. I think it is an institution, or at least it was an institution, which could tolerate character. For one thing, it was a place that allowed you to remain honest and have integrity, which itself was a very big thing for various reasons. But also it was a place where you somehow ended up getting amazing bosses. That's a story that I can write all over. and I had some very people with a lot of patience.
Yeah.
So I'll give you the Bangalore, and maybe it was because of Bangalore, because something about this city at that time was exceptional.
Yeah.
So although it was just beginning to change, when I came to Bangalore, people had started to crib. The locals had started to crib about too many outsiders, because lots of people were coming into the engineering colleges, and also there was a little bit of a
the IT
cultural
services boom was at its peak.
No, I came in 1990, so it was just about
beginning
starting
to take off,
and all these campuses were getting built and things, so people were beginning to complain. But the funny thing was that people were beginning to complain about having to buy refrigerators and not even yet air conditioners, although some people did have it. I mean, I'm sure the rich people had, but I'm talking about people that I was meeting. And I actually lived here for 1 year without a refrigerator.
Yeah.
Obviously no question of an AC, and I never had any spoilt milk, so that was the temperature, which was amazing for somebody coming from North India, where weather was extreme. And I'm a very weather driven person, which is one of the reasons that I eventually moved to the mountains, but that itself just absolutely went to my head. I loved it. The second thing was that people were just exceptional. So in RBI Bangalore, where I was this young officer who had absolutely no grooming or understanding of what is it like to be a bureaucrat, because I'd straight away come from college, from a girls' college to a journalism school to this place. And in Chennai, they trained us a lot in terms of the theory of it, but the theory of it is very different from when you actually end up in the office. But the office had such extraordinary people, because we were supposed to do desk-to-desk training for 1.5 years. Those days, the training was very long. So 1.5 years, you had to go from desk to desk, department to department, which I don't know how much we learned of the subject matter, but at least in my case, I learned a lot about people. So Bangalore was so interesting, because everybody that I would go and sit and to spend time with, many of them would inevitably say, "You look like my daughter," or "Why don't you come home over the weekend?" "Oh my God, you're staying alone." And nobody ever gave their address, so I know.
You don't know how to get to their house.
So nobody was ever serious about it. But the fact that people said, "Come and meet my daughter," which was the most often heard sentence for me at that stage, just made me so happy about living in the city. I had my struggles. So this is a city where when I came as a 22-year-old young person, there was a night where I had no place to go and sleep in. And that shaped my attitude towards HR for the rest of my life. So whenever I've hired a person, especially young women, I've always asked them if they have a place to stay, and if they don't, then I've tried to do something about it. But RBI being a bureaucracy, it's a long story, but I'm not going to tell you. But it was something that it was a stage where I had to figure out a lot of things on my own. But at the same time, there were a lot of people who were willing to help me. The anecdote that I find most telling of how I bumbled my way through those initial years of RBI is, I was also writing my master's exam in DU, which was kind of a half-done job. And so I would be sitting in office and finishing my work, which wasn't a lot, and reading a novel or a play or Shakespeare or Dickens or Hardy. And to me, that was the most honorable thing to do. And I never realized that when you come to office, you're not supposed to be reading a book. So I finished my work and I'm sitting and reading a book, and the boss walks in, really senior person, and stands behind on my shoulder, looks at me and says, and I don't notice him, and he says, "That looks like a very interesting book you're reading, Shinjini." And I turn to him and I say, I don't even stand up, okay? I turn to him and I say, "Yes, it's a really interesting book." And then he says, "Yeah, really? Well, what is it?" So I show him the cover and I start really excitedly talking about it. Instead of telling me that you're not supposed to be reading novels in the book, he says, "Okay, my daughter is also very fond of reading. Why don't you come home in the evening and meet her?" And I actually did go to his house and meet his daughter. So that was the nature of people that I started my career with. So somehow that gave me a lot of confidence to deal with the subject of finance and policy. It wasn't hard for me to get interested in public policy because I think I was raised in a family where not too many people had jobs anyway. So I had no preconceived notions about
what an ideal job
jobs
like.
are meant to, are supposed to be, what wealth creation is supposed to be, what I didn't know any engineers except some coal mining engineers who worked in my father's company. So I had no preconceived ideas. So that was the first thing that I got into, and I had good grooming. I had a very good training opportunity. RBI was really investing into us from a knowledge perspective, and I was a person who soaked that very excitedly. So I had a really great time. 17 years, I will not say that I did not have any downs. There were things that, in retrospect in particular, I realized that they were, for example, when I had my first child, in that year, we had 6-month maternity breaks, and I was doing very well in my career at the time. My son was born in 95, and right before that, I was in the foreign exchange department, and that department was going through a massive amount of change. This was the liberalizing 90s, and every day, and I was in Delhi, which was at the heart of this entire liberalization that was happening, and therefore I had the opportunity to really do a lot of good work, and somehow, because of my literature training, I could read a lot, I could soak a lot, and I could remember a lot. So I was that person who would, and those days memory had a role to play. You didn't have memory on your phone. So people would actually ask me, hey, do you remember this section or this provision, and how is it changed? And I would remember that on this date this provision was changed to make way for this, and there was a certain amount of extra smartness that as a young person you also like to display, and that kind of was working quite well. But then I get pregnant and I go home to have the baby, and I had a difficult pregnancy anyway. And then when I come back, I was due for a promotion in the next year, but in that year my performance report is not the best that it could be, because it wasn't based on performance only. It was based on the fact that I was not available.
Leave for 6 months.
And these things, now when you look back, you think they are unfair or discriminatory. But I think at that point of time it was par for course. It wasn't really such a big deal for the person who was taking that decision. But I'll tell you, life is so there's so much serendipity and so much luck. So that year my report is not good. So if I'm going to be considered, I am probably not going to make it. But right after, I get a boss who was actually again from Bangalore, and a man who really shaped my thinking in many ways, because he had a brilliant mind and a brilliant way of thinking about the economy and liberalization and globalization, and he shared generously. So it wasn't uncommon for him to be holding court, and I did that a lot in my career later. So he would just have a lot of young people sitting there, and he would talk about things that were not directly related to what you were going to do today, but they helped you to think and understand the bigger picture. So I was very lucky to have him. So he, after 1 year of work, sort of made up for the previous track record, and made sure that I got a promotion. And it didn't happen with me only once, it happened with me another time also. So it's not that there were no ups and downs, but largely I have a lot of respect for RBI because it can tolerate personality. I did not feel the pressure to become somebody else as much as I felt it in other places, which tend to talk a lot more about leadership and styles and authenticity and personality, but actually the pressure to conform is a lot higher. In RBI, somehow I realized I could still be me, which was a great thing for me. Still I left.
Yeah, of course. And I was just going to come to if I divide your 3 decades into 3 parts, of course, as a policymaker at RBI, and the second half really is when you switch sides of the table and you move from being regulator to regulated and you join the industry side of things. How was it switching sides and now coming in and owning P&Ls and building businesses ground up?
It was quite extraordinary. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't give you a short answer to that, but a few things. So people used to ask me, what does it feel like to leave RBI?
Yeah.
And I used to say, I feel like I've had a cataract surgery because suddenly the world is clearer to
Yeah.
me. Because when
Yeah.
you are sitting there, people who come to meet you always feel obliged to say the nice things, the
Yeah.
right things. And I used to say, if I'm as half as good as I've been told, I'm very impressed with myself.
Yeah.
Because it's always, there is this very bad thing that happens to you in the bureaucracy, which was part of the reason I left there, because you begin to, at least I began
Yeah.
to get this feeling that the world that I'm seeing is not complete for my understanding. And having been a literature student and maybe at
Yeah.
heart always the journalist, always the
Yeah.
writer, that feeling of discomfort just kept growing as I became more senior. When I was junior, I could still dig around a
Yeah.
little bit, but
Yeah.
as you become senior, everything becomes a little more constrained.
Yeah.
The expectation definitely is that you will not go around talking to talking to bankers over coffee to
Yeah.
understand about what's
Yeah.
going on, and there are always filters.
Yeah.
So it started to get uncomfortable for me because of that. And then there was my husband was abroad,
Yeah.
and I wanted to
Yeah.
switch sides, etc. I did that, great fun, got tremendous opportunities. A few things that happened was that one was that other people found it very hard to shake off my regulatory utility. So while I was willing to adapt and while I was willing to work hard to give myself a second chance and a second career in a true sense, for a very long time, people who on the face of it gave me those opportunities still largely expected my regulatory expertise to be the foundation of my career. And I used to joke that if I was to solve everybody's regulatory problems, I should still have been in RBI.
Yeah.
Why am I outside?
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm outside, then the idea for me is to do something different. And I'm facing the exact same thing even today. So, for example, if I'm now here,
Yeah.
my image
Yeah.
when I went into
Yeah.
setting up a startup,
Yeah.
my image was that of a senior banker and regulatory person, and that image is something. In fact, I have a really nice short poem on that, where that image that gets created is the one that sticks to you and becomes your permanent identity for other people, whereas for you things may really have changed quite a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
So that was happening at a very metaphysical level, but on the more practical level, I actually enjoyed it
Yeah.
because I was getting great opportunities to look at the actual real world and applications in a manner that I was finding constrained within RBI to look at. And I don't think when I was in RBI, I was a bank supervisor for many years, right? So you would go inside a bank, you understood the theory of the bank very well because you had the P&L of the bank, and that's what your job involved, looking at every aspect of the bank, making an assessment, making actually good judgment, making calls on some. But it's a very different thing when you're doing that for somebody else's business. It's a very different thing when it's your business, because now suddenly all the constraints are visible to you. You can't be second-hand smart. You don't have the benefit of hindsight. You are now sitting here and making decisions for the future. You're making calls saying this will work out or this will not work out, and you're making mistakes, and you're sometimes right, and you're and then you are building your own team. So the other big difference was that while in RBI, you learned to work with the teams that you were given, and I have great anecdotes on that. But once I left RBI, then it was also about picking your team, finding the right people. I found that very exciting because I was able to sort of
Assemble
create
your own team.
something, assemble my own team, have a vision, draw people to that. So when I was in consulting, for example, this whole idea of payment was a very new idea. It was a very nascent thing at that point of time. But for me, that vision was much clearer than for most people, because while the world that was building product was looking at it from a customer customer and problem solving perspective, and the regulators were looking at it from a from their perspective of licensing and risk management, etc. I was somebody who was able to look at it across the spectrum and actually understand the what was going on or what was going to happen, which was one of the reasons that I focused very strongly on that aspect of digital banking, and which is how I eventually found myself in Paytm. And when I was in Paytm, the most interesting thing was that now all of a sudden, as somebody who was from the regulator side and was now sitting to making calls on the banking product and services and operating model and data storage and technology sharing and all of those things, I was bringing my terms of reference from everything that I had done in the previous years as a bank supervisor and also as a consultant. But what was happening here is that there was a double degree of mistrust. So RBI believed that I had, you're
an insider of sorts.
I was not on their side. That I was on the side of the market and not probably not to be trusted. And on this side, people believed that they were doing innovation, and I was probably too conservative for their liking, because so it was a very uncomfortable place in some sense, and in some sense it was a great vantage point, because I was learning absolutely dramatically new things and completely absorbing that, and I could bring the benefit of having a macro understanding to that learning. So personally it was very enriching, but professionally it was an uncomfortable place to be in, which is why you find that I'm out of Paytm in 18 months, or less than that, 15 months.
Very interesting. Do you think that especially for long tenure career women, they'll ever be given benefit of that doubt of wanting to transition in and out, or early career decisions pretty much kind of stamp your identity?
I don't think this is the gender problem. This is the problem of the world, of the world we live in, where putting us into blocks and buckets is the way is the easiest way for people to deal with us. So, and especially in a market where the demand far outstrips supply, people doing that to you is not something that you even have any control over. It's like the way our schools select children and eliminate them at every level would be a shame in any decent society. But we all take it for granted, and we only watch out for our own kids as long as they get into a school and as long as they pass an exam, and we don't really think about the thousands who are left behind in that process. So similarly in the job space, it's a universal problem of people not being constantly being fitted into things, expected to be, and which is part of the reason that workplaces are so contentious and difficult for young people now, because it's generations of that particular model of people expected to fit in. And I was probably one of the early people who in my generation started to feel that, and but I was also lucky that because of this, because I wasn't yet in that stage of transition, I could find myself a few useful things to do. I really think that it's also a function of the stage of technology that you're living in. There will be times when the industry will be more open to new ideas, and there will be times when they will simply be running to make more money, and then that's the time when they will want to simplify things, streamline things, and just run with it. So I think it's a function of the technology shift that you are living through. It's also a function of the organizational shift that you are that particular organization is going through. So when I joined PwC, for example, I thought it was a great opportunity because they had just been through Satyam. And they were really struggling. And for me, it was I've always taken jobs with what's the worst thing that will happen? I'll not do well and I'll do something else. And I've always had a backup option, at least until the time that I turned 45, that I'll go to US, do a PhD and teach, because that was always my fallback option, to teach or to write, because I was academic. So I said, okay, fine, worst case, nothing will work out, then we'll see. But once I go there, I realized that there is a lot more receptivity to how I want to do things, how I want to position, how I want to get into payments, because they were going through a stage where they did not already have running financial services, there was already disruption, and there were already there was a struggle. So when organizations go through struggle, they're open to more new ideas, open to taking a little bit more chance with some leaders. And that's when a lot of women actually get into those leadership roles too. So to come back to your question, yes, you will get some of those opportunities because you're probably a little bit willing to take more risk sometimes. And but largely when things are, if you go for organizations that are they already have a stable brand, they're already going through that stable phase of continuous growth, then you will be expected to fit in more than the organization will do anything for you. So you have to also pick and choose that. So even today, because I want to work on boards, and I do work on boards, I try and I completely avoid like big established bank boards for that reason, because you go there, the ship is running, you are expected to be waking up in time for breakfast. But you go to a place where they are still, either their cook has run away or something is not working, then you kind of work together to make sure that things come in place. And I enjoy the latter more than the former. I'm sure there are enough people who enjoy the former. So it's a function of the fit between you, the times you live in, the organization you work for.
And you have not been afraid to put yourself in new positions and new spaces and do completely different things. And that leads me to being a founder. When you started your own app, MySalt app, for women to be more financially independent and aware of the decisions they're taking. And that also brings me to the book you've written off it. So I really want to know the backstory to this book. You've spoken about how your mother, of course, inspired you to write an interesting book, but would love to know the origin story when you woke up one day, or was it slow brewing, and how did the busy woman come about?
Sure. So the two stories are intertwined, because I had never worked in gender as a space. I think I was always a person with feministic ideas, and I lived my life with a great degree of independence. So that was always there, but I never thought about it as a conscious choice to make that into a book, or how people have this idea of writing long LinkedIn posts about something. I was not that person. Even my LinkedIn posts are all about, I'm just having a good time somewhere and I want to share it with people, or I want to save it for later and I have no other place to go and write at, I'll write something. So just go with the flow was my philosophy. But when I started the startup, that was the first time, not the first time, I must say that when I moved from RBI to the private sector, that was the first time I started to see the challenges of gender in the workplace in any sort of a live and meaningful way, for two reasons. One was that I was senior enough to be a part of that problem solving, and therefore I started to take an active interest in it, because you start to see discrimination, you start to see harassment, you start to see day-to-day challenges that are articulated, not articulated, the fear of articulation. So there was a learning curve there, but that was more of an HR thing. But when Chaitra and Aditi and I came together to build MySalt app, then we consciously started to expand that idea of women and money, because money is so integral to independence, and therefore it's money, power, and women. You can call it power, you can call it independence, but that was the triumvirate that we were trying to sort of go after. And then we started to see all kinds of things that I had not seen before, frankly. I had read a lot, I could relate to a lot of different types of situations. I grew up in a village, I lived in small towns, so I had seen all kinds of things, but never really consciously drew that line of understanding. So when SALT was, and obviously in the beginning we thought of SALT not so much as a female-centric NGO project, which unfortunately a lot of our investors or potential investors thought of, but we never thought of it like that. We thought of it as a smart population segment which could be groomed to become buyers of financial services rather than being sold financial services, because the fundamental problem in financial services, in my experience, has been that financial services are sold. And because they are sold, that trust is
missold as well.
Selling will involve mis-selling, and the information asymmetry between the customer and the seller is quite big. There are all kinds of issues, so trust is broken. And can we do something where this customer begins to understand their life and their money better, and therefore can buy, can have enough, understanding and knowledge and whatever life stage related nudges to go and buy what they need to buy. That was the idea. That the app was open for men and women, but we were building for women because women had not been spoilt by this ecosystem which keeps throwing loans personal loans at you, keeps throwing FNO trading at you, keeps throwing all kinds of opportunities to make money at you. Most of the users of those things are young boys, and young boys are the ones who are keeping this sort of fluff going and floating around. And we wanted to see that because women were not so much a part of that, could we take them and could we actually create journeys that were more useful? That was the idea, right? But when we started to find it hard to raise money on the back of that idea, and of course the ecosystem changed, the technology shift started to happen with AI and everything, I started to travel, partly because I always travel when I have to get clarity in my mind, and partly because I really wanted to see this woman user who was not supposed to exist, independent, money-making, smart woman. So there was this very overwhelming prototype of the microfinance beneficiary woman, because the industry has worked for more than 3 decades to build that, to bring that woman to life. There has been a massive amount of capital pumped into that industry, but now everybody knows about the woman who buys a mixie and saves time to send her children to school, or the woman who makes laddus and earns some side income, or the woman who opens a bank account and is able to make small savings. We've all gone and understood that story. And because also we are a very large country, we have all kinds of local, regional variations. That story is a long-term story. So people always push you to solve for that problem because it's an understood problem. But to me, the future, because we are now 3 generations of growth in post-liberalization, and that's where the book comes in, because I started to think that why is it that we are still so comfortable with microfinance but not comfortable with young women who are teachers, air hostesses, who are first generation earners, women earners in their background. So they don't know any other woman who has earned and saved and bought insurance. Why is it she not enough for me to build for? And what am I not doing right to profile this person to my investors or to other people in the ecosystem who somehow keep pushing me to say, please do something, my maid is not able to save money. That was like the most common emotional response to our product from men in particular. Not so much from women, because they were seeing the utility. They were also coming to us and saying, I have 10 lakh rupees, help me to invest it. But we were seeing a lot of this, overwhelmingly, this kind of a response. So I wanted to travel to go and which is why in the book you find me screening women over that layer of the laddu making women who I love, but I wanted to go beyond and profile others. So that's why I started to travel. I had no plan, as I write in the book. I had no plan. I just board a train and I land in a city and I start to enjoy this. And I start to enjoy it enough to keep doing it repeatedly. And I go through 30 cities and I hire somebody who wonderful. I also am lucky always to find the right people. So they do a very good degree of documentation. We do interviews. The idea was not to make a book at all. When I was traveling, barring towards the later part of the journey, when I started to actually talk about the book. In the beginning, we would tell people that we are doing a research for a white paper. I always wanted to do a white paper because the idea was to move people in public policy and other ecosystem players to start to understand this woman better. So, so I was doing that. When my mother got sick and I had to stop traveling and I had to go and spend time with her, and Salt was already on Salt because we were not able to raise funding. That was when this idea to make it into a book came to me, and because also I found Penguin responsive to making it a book, and it all happened very quickly. And so I said, okay, I'll go to I told my mother, she was feeling better at the time, so I went to the mountains and I told her I'll go and I'll try to write a few chapters, send it to the publisher, and then come back. And so I go there, and then she calls and she says, just one clear direction: write an interesting book.
Yeah.
And that just suddenly shifted everything in my head. Then I was like, okay, this has to be a book, but this has to be a book that somebody will read from, read at leisure,
Yeah.
read and share with other people, talk about it. It has to be an interesting book. So I kind of.
Yeah. Any? I definitely want to ask you to read us some of your favorite stories from the book, and we'll come to that. But any surprises? Anything through these 300 plus women that you met? I call it 330, 300, 3 years, 30 cities, 300 interviews. What surprised you, and what was par for course through this journey for you?
So the more things change, the more they remain the same also. So you do realize that people are raising their daughters with a much higher degree of investment and indulgence and sort of independence now than before. Having said that, very fundamental ideas that you must marry at a certain age, and you must marry somebody who earns more than you, and when you marry you move almost always, and when you have a child, then you take care of that's your primary responsibility. So there are some of these ideas that don't change, and I did not find them change. Also, it's in fact in many ways, if I compare it to the pre-liberalization period, many of these cities have now become much bigger, much more infrastructure, many more wealthy people, a much bigger consumer market, but they are still run by the very few families and very few castes and communities. So we haven't really grown in that sense, which is the disappointing thing. But on the side of the change and the positive change that is happening, there were many very interesting and surprising stories. Some of it challenged my own ideas of feminism. Some of it challenged my own ideas of work. Some of it challenged my own ideas of what we as a society consider to be useful. So for example, we don't consider a rich woman building a theater to be useful. But if you think about all of our cities, they are interesting cities because mostly a woman, but also maybe men, have gone ahead and built some of this cultural infrastructure which young people like to go to, etc. So there was a lot of learning for me in the process. There was a lot of challenging my own ideas. There was a lot of challenge from other people. So I would go to a city and I would meet somebody and I'd be raving about that young woman who's done an MBA and got married into a business family and is now running a part of the business. And almost inevitably, if I was talking to a man, or many cases also a woman, I would be asked, but why are you talking to rich women? She is a rich woman. And I realized that the bias against rich women is much higher than bias against rich men. Because almost all business people in these cities are sons of rich men. But their inheritance, their ability to take forward their business is a par for course. It's very easily accepted. But if a woman comes into the family or is the daughter and she's now doing it, the label of she's some rich man's daughter, some rich man's wife, some rich man's sister stays. In fact, people introduce you as such. People say, oh, go and meet so-and-so, she's so-and-so's sister. And it's only when you go and meet that person and when you start to really ask her, and even the women are very self-effacing most of the time. It's only when you sit with them and talk like for an hour that you begin to really understand what she does on a day-to-day basis in her work and what is the value of that work. And there is a story in my book about a woman whose family is into building equestrian equipment and exporting it, and therefore and she works on the design, and obviously for something like that, design is very critical. It has to be very top notch. It has to be and you're exporting, so it's a very critical part of the business. But it took me like a very long time to talk to her to actually begin to understand her role, how she perceives herself. So of course there were a huge amount of learning for me. But you have to read the book to actually understand this. I can't really explain this in a...
Were there any other archetypes, if not labels, that you saw consistent, irrespective of the cities or the backgrounds or the even educational backgrounds that these women came from, in terms of the way we think, the way we behave, how ambitious we are, etc.?
So there definitely, and I write about it in the book also, there definitely is that archetypal woman who starts a boutique or a cafe or a pastry shop or something, primarily because her family is generating a lot of black money. And I'm a banker, I can't unsee that aspect of the business building. But what I started to realize eventually, and they're quite a lot, and they're quite a lot, and many times it's the woman doesn't even know what she's making and how her books are being used to show profits or whatever. And initially it was a bit of a I mean, you know it, but when you start going and seeing it, it begins to be a little bit of a jarring experience, because I had set out with the idea that I want to feel good. I want to do a feel good book. And then I start to read the transcripts, and I start to remember that, okay, these are the type of people. Then I also start to realize that it's not a woman problem. It's a country problem. It's a growth stage problem. It's an economy problem. Many businesses that are run and owned by men have a very similar split of capital, money coming from all kinds of political, back channels, money coming from all kinds of real estate deals, cash. So that's the economy we live in. But when the women begin to use it, we kind of shame them a lot more. We shame them a lot more for doing this, and that makes it much harder for the actual sincere woman who's building something. So there's a woman in Patna who actually talks about it. She says, it's the commonest thing for me to hear that husband ka paisa hoga, but you don't, until you come and see what I'm doing, until you actually understand what my day looks like, you will not understand that. So which is why for me this travel was very important. This going into their location, their shop, their homes was very important to understand this aspect of it.
I also want to talk a little bit about scale, given the number of small businesses, solopreneurs that you've interviewed. Are all these businesses necessarily subscale because of some of these constraints? Either it's a family business with, say, capital constraints, or the city you're in maybe is a constraint, or access to investor money because there is a negative bias against a lady owning a cafe or a bookshop, etc. But are they necessarily therefore subscale businesses?
No. And this is the primary thing that I want bankers reading this book to take away from. Bankers, wealth managers, anybody in the financial services really needs to read this book with and understand the nuance, to understand that how far we have moved in the last 30 years and how we are actually sitting on that potential because of this older sort of understanding of the economy, where actually it was subscale and actually it was difficult. Today, there are other factors because of which it is subscale. But it's so amazing actually to think about this in the macro perspective. So in the macro picture, what has happened is that 3 or 4 generations now of wealth creation, these families now have so much wealth. And a lot of that wealth is real estate. And that real estate in these towns has become so expensive that there is a competitive disadvantage to anybody who wants to enter it from outside. Which is one of the reasons that you find these same families and their tentacles everywhere, and you don't find new people, that many coming in and entering. It's the same problem in places like this, which is why you have places like a co-working space solving for it. But in the larger cities, in the top tier cities, there is the same problem, but that problem is being solved through different innovative, creative approaches, and you see a lot more solutioning happening. But in these tier 2 cities that I'm talking about, which is where the next phase of growth will come from. So when you talked about the threes, 3 years, 3 cities, the 30 cities and 300 women. I'm also talking about the next 3 decades of growth and where that will come from. That next decade of 3 decades of growth will come from these places, and these places really need to get their act together on some of these aspects. The entry barriers are very high. Some places it's very interestingly being solved because of and I talk about it in the book. I can't give you all the examples, but largely that situation remains. So when women-owned businesses are not scaling anymore, it's not because demand is not there, because demand is there, And demand is also not just there in their own places, but because of technology, because of models of franchising, because of increased communication, because of an airport being available to everybody within a distance, because of people's greater willingness and ability to travel, to be on the internet, and I talk a lot about that. There is actually the ability to meet demand. I'll give you the example of a woman I meet who manufactures industrial ropes. She accidentally, her husband already has a family business, she gets married into the family, business is not doing well, they start to look for other things, and one way or another she ends up into this manufacturing of ropes. Manufacturing of ropes starts as a small business, but if you see how much garden furnitures have grown in this country, how much, and she starts as an export business, but now she gets a lot of demand also because we are an economy where more people want garden chairs, more people want fancy lamp lights, and these things get used everywhere. So the demand is growing, and the ability of that person to understand that demand, meet that demand, improve the design is also increasing, regardless of where she is building that business from. That is the very interesting part. But still, if she is not scaling, there are various factors. One is, if you are a new entrant to the market, the rent will kill you, the capital cost will kill you. So, which is why many of these women you find are coming from families that already have access to capital. Now, for them, moving from that family capital supported business and serving an area that is convenient for them to the next stage of growth, which some of these women end up doing, like a Mrs. Bector or like a Mrs. Jan, who end up doing that, but not all of them being able to do that, is actually a function of two things that I talk about in the book. One is kya zarurat hai, the great Indian middle class and upper class syndrome, that if you don't need to do it, why do it? So that's a very big barrier to scale, innovation, expansion, and that typical journey that a growing business should take. And so kya zarurat hai is a big one. And the second one is even worse. That is kuch to kar rahi hai. So most of these women are groomed into, I call it like the bonsai syndrome. So you're a beautiful tree, you have very good education, you have very good training, you can speak great English, you've gone to the best of schools and colleges, but you're allowed by your family to grow, but only like a bonsai plant. You have to always be pretty, and you have to always be small, and that's what keeps the universe comfortable. You can't grow like a wild mango tree and start having, but mangoes don't come from bonsais, mangoes come from trees. If we allow these businesses, if our attitudes were different and these businesses were growing and giving us those 2,000 mangoes every tree, we would have an economy that would be better. That's the macro argument that I mean, you will say it's anecdotal, you will say, oh, only 30 cities, oh, only 300 women, but think about it.
So isn't the macro personal, therefore, for those women who don't have the access to, say, a family business and to start up and to become a true blue first generation entrepreneur, if not a VC-backed founder, to speak? Aren't their choices like really limited because of this macro that we are currently in?
And ditto for men. And primarily the reason why our economy will not realize its potential if we don't solve for some of these things. It's not just a woman problem. Women have the additional problem of saying that when your child comes home, you have to be at home. Or they themselves taking the pressure of, my child's birthday is in August and I will start planning from
right
now. Those are the different type of problems. But in general, for even a man who does not come from that capital background, it's extremely hard to break into that and build in these cities. I'm saying even in tier 1 cities, but in tier 1 cities, as I said, we have found found the venture capital. People like you, people like the building in which we are sitting. There are many solutions that are being worked out, but not so much in these cities. In these cities, it is still harder which is one of the reasons that you don't see so much migration between these cities. Nobody gets up in Kanpur and says, oh, let's go to Bhubaneswar and set up this business. Very, very rare. Women do, because they get married in Bhubaneswar. Now they find themselves in Bhubaneswar and they say, okay, let's solve a local problem. But very few people out of choice will migrate between these cities. And face those problems. Why? I can come when I can come here and I can access capital and I can access a workplace and I can somehow make that model work. Why will I go there? But imagine if this was available to 100 cities in the country. Imagine the ecosystem and what it would do.
Yeah. Very, very interesting, and would love to read a few snippets, some of your favorite pages or entrepreneur stories, small town stories. I love you to pick, and happy to kind of get into those pages with you.
Okay. So one thing that I will talk about is, day before yesterday, I had this conversation with Manish Sabarwal, and he really pushed me in a very nice way to think about the idea of anecdotes versus, learning from macro understanding of things and writing about it. And it is true that going out on the street and trying to build these stories has its disadvantage in terms of appearing like, oh, so what, 30 cities, 300 women.
Yeah.
But there are two things that I want to say. One is that you have a lot of fun when you do this. And for me, that's something that I never underestimate in my life. So when you hit the road, you're learning from every cup of coffee that you're drinking. And it's amazing. But the second thing that you only realize when you're out on the road is things like this. Safety. How important is mobility and safety for being able to be independent and do things. So these things which are not otherwise convertible in terms of your loss to GDP numbers. But when you are out there, you begin to understand why it is. So I'll read a little bit from something that I call the bar paradox. And then I'll read you a tiny little story of a girl, and then we'll...
Lovely.
Yeah. So in the bar paradox, I talk about the fact that our spaces are not safe, and therefore, they constrain us. In this context, the establishment of cities is not just an inevitability because of growth in population and jobs, but a critical necessity. The coming together of public infrastructure such as airports, roads, educational institutions, hospitals with private infrastructure such as shared taxis, hospitality, private clubs or malls, and the attendant employment opportunities are all necessary for the development of cities, but not sufficient. Safety and freedom are germane to urban culture, and they are scarce in India. Interestingly, women improve the safety rating of a place at significant cost to their personal safety, as evident from the bar paradox. All bars want more women guests, so the crowd is better behaved and the bar is perceived as safe. But the presence of that objective already indicates the problem of poor safety conditions for women in bars. And you can apply this to taxis, you can apply this to workplaces. It is not celebrated half as much as our GDP growth or number of unicorns, but women riding cycles and scooters on our roads is one of the biggest achievements of the last few decades in India. As a girl child growing up in Bihar, I had observed a peculiar phenomenon. In the village, women were not allowed or expected to go out during the day. Few went to school after puberty. Most got married young and were subject to similar restrictions in their marital homes. So women only went out during the night or very early in the morning. And they rarely went beyond the confines of their own caste or community spaces. Everyone knew everyone, and the light belonged to the men, but the dark was freedom for the woman to step out, not a matter of fear. When I went to Patna, it was the reverse. Urban life meant strangers. It is what makes urban centers attractive to people. All are welcome, at least in theory. But once there, behavioral norms are not set for any kind of modern interaction, which is also what cities are meant to provide. Hence, as a girl, I was only allowed to go out to specific places and only during daytime. Night was the time of fear because men owned the streets and no accepted norms of interaction existed. A crowd of men meant uncontrollable harassment. Hindi cinema had done its bit over decades to create each girl in the image of a coy lass who secretly wanted the hero to harass her, and the English language in India had done even greater injustice by giving it a euphemistic name, calling it Eve teasing. So as far as men were concerned, we were all Eves. Our education, our fierce feminist beliefs, our elite disinterest did not matter. We were on the road, we were unfair game. In my 5 years in Patna, I never saw an entire film. Our hack to survive gropers and pinchers was to enter the theater after the film had started and to leave well before the film ended and the harassment began. I had not known the pleasure of an Amitabh Bachchan film casting, often the best part of the film. You know, while growing up in this terrible atmosphere, we had heard a lot about the culture of the southern part of India. I'm just going to read a little bit more because Bangalore comes here. Which had more women in public spaces, more education for both sexes, and presumably less eve teasing. So a bunch of us came to Chennai from North India and fell for the myth of safety in the fabled South. We started to go out and have as much fun as was possible, though within the constraint of coming back before curfew time. We were officers of the Reserve Bank of India,
but we
still had curfew time. And sure enough, we felt nice and safe, but only as long as the light lasted. If we continued to walk on the posh Mount Road after dark, it was not uncommon to be directly propositioned or catcalled, especially if you had light skin and short hair. Bangalore was better, and we often decided to walk the 3-kilometer stretch between office and home in the evening. Walking down the undulating road, crossing pubs and gardens, it felt safe, beautiful, and free. It made a huge difference to our worldview, the cities we grew up and were groped in. Eventually, we all wanted to come to Mumbai. Some of us did, including me. So, you know, this is not the way we think about growth and development and economy.
Yeah.
But I'm pushing you to think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you do say that if India's growth story is real, then it needs to show up in 3 places, and women's safety, women's time, and women's ownership. So through this journey and through the book, maybe you could pick another section to read. Which one do you believe is improving the fastest? And we spoke about safety, which is a bottleneck no one wants to talk about or fund or actively solve for. Yeah.
Mobility is one that in my lifetime got solved to some extent. There are states in the south that are now doing free, free travel for women. There are obviously in places like Bihar there is the cycle scheme. Every girl gets a cycle, so you have more of them on the roads. So there is, I think, good, good things to see there. But when you give mobility, where does that person go? You still find lovers in this city, in our cities, who are shunted into a dark corner of a park, and you still find people who will tell you. The other day I was in some city, I can't even remember because I've been traveling so much, and I told some woman that I want to go to this park because I had some association with it. Yes, Deer Park in Hauz Khas in Delhi. And I said, I would love to go there because I went there at some time or whatever. And she said, oh, but it's not a nice park anymore. So I said, what happened? I thought maybe the trees got cut. I thought maybe somebody, opened a drain. All of those things happened. And she said, no, there are only boys and girls are there. So this boys, girls, lovers and prostitutes problem in India,
still
in public spaces, is a major barrier to our cultural growth. So when you start to move people, now they need to go somewhere. Where will they go? In Patna, if you go, there are beautiful. So my chapter on Patna is called All Dressed and Nowhere to Go. Because the city is so well dressed. You've got beautiful flyovers. You've got this lovely promenade on the Ganga. You've got nice places. You've got an amazing museum, the best in the country actually. Not in terms of the artifacts so much as in terms of the gorgeous building, a great cafeteria. But with all of that infrastructure, if you're not safe, where will you go? And who will go? So, and if you go and you have to take care of, being dressed in a certain way and being seen by a certain type of people and being in the company of a certain, it's so much burden on people.
Fair enough.
We're not living lives. We are constantly complying.
No, there is a contradiction to a lot of these things, as you said, you can solve, but would love to move to what you're going to pick next.
So problems are not, so to that extent it's not getting solved. What is getting solved though, which I feel very enthusiastic about, is a lot more girls are inheriting. And a lot more girls are inheriting because they are single daughters, they are a part of 2-daughter, 3-daughter families. After so many years of, family planning, we've gotten ourselves to that point at least, where girls are inheriting. And there is a chapter, it's not a whole chapter, but a section in my book that is called The Daughter Shall Inherit. And the daughter shall inherit is a phenomenon that I track through the book. And I talk about many women who inherit business. And actually many daughters-in-law inheriting as well, for various reasons. So those are all good stories. So I'll just end with a very small story. You asked me about things that challenged me. One of the things that got challenged by was my own idea of feminism, because I happen to have lived a very charmed life, even though I'm born in a village, but my parents happen to be very distinctive people, and so we are able to break out of that sort of societal pressure. And I also then marry somebody who's who's a very evolved sort of person. So I do whatever I want to do. There are so many times in my life when I've made a decision to buy a property worth crores without talking to anybody. There are times when I have made a phone call and said, yes, I'm joining this job without having to tell anybody in my family, and I've never really had to think about it. So I believed in my head that a lot of it is up to you. But traveling and meeting other women made me humbler and made me realize that barriers exist. Barriers exist, but it also made me, in a way, happy to explore and to understand how women are coping through these barriers. That's actually the most beautiful story in this book. So the reason I think this book is interesting to a much wider audience is because if you're a woman and you read this story, you come back with a lot of takeaways about how women navigate spaces and challenges. And somebody asked me what's common between these women, and I'll tell you the thing that I found common between more of these women than anything else was a sense of humor. Because if you can't laugh at patriarchy, you cannot survive it. It will crush you.
Can't take yourself as well too seriously.
So you can't take yourself too seriously, and you can't take other idiots too seriously. So you have to sort of and many of them do that. So this but you look for it in places where you look for a certain type of women. But I got it from places where I wasn't really prepared for it. So I'm going to read a small story.
Which page number is that? So I'll get
this
to
is
it
33.
Well. Beautiful.
And this I've been reading this section over the last 2-3 days because primarily because it's small, but also because it's very meaningful to me. It's called Ek Cup Chai Mein Kya Hai? By the day end, I'm in Raipur, and I've met many women through the day, and then I reached this point. By the day end, I am tired. I find a large salon that is about to close, but they agree to give me a foot massage. My therapist, Neelam, turns out to be a treat for my tired feet and my low spirits after this full day of elevating and deflating conversations. Neelam's family migrated to Raipur a few generations ago from Bengal. Her in-laws live in Kolkata. Her husband is a mechanic in a Maruti workshop. They live nearby. She has 2 school-going kids. The youngest is 3 years old. She drops them on her scooter to her mom's place in the morning and picks them up in the evening. I ask her guiltily if staying back late is a problem. Oh, most of the time my mother has fed them by the time I go to pick them up. I take them home and cook for me and my husband. I ask her if her husband helps. He also comes around the same time. I make him a tea first, and we have tea before I make dinner. But why can't he make tea? I ask, expecting to hear the usual complaints. She pipes up. अरे मैडम, एक कप चाय में लगता ही क्या है? फिर मैं बैठकर उनके साथ चाय पी लेती हूँ. I have a mental image of this hard-working young couple catching some moments between work and bedtime, sipping tea. And maybe it does not matter who makes the tea. So I ask her what happens when she's sick. She says her husband cooks dinner and takes the children to school. Does he drink? I ask. Her reply surprises me. Drink करेगा तो रखूंगी क्या? भगा दूंगी वापस Calcutta. If he drinks, will I keep him? I will send him back to Calcutta, she says. She says she does not understand why any woman would suffer an indignity from a man when every woman is better than every man. This day ends well with my feet and my spirits healed and happy. Thank you, Neelam.
I think that was a wonderful positive note for us to conclude this podcast as well. And if I have to ask you one last question and one more thing in terms of how you yourself would summarize your long arc journey, I would say, and leave us with something optimistic and hopeful, what would that be, Shinjini?
I have just started.
Yeah.
I feel the same that I felt when I was 22 and came to Bangalore.
Yeah.
And I feel the same that I felt when I was 40 and left Reserve Bank of India and threw myself to the world at large. And I feel exactly the same now as a writer.
Awesome.
So that's my that's how I would summarize it. And the one takeaway is buy the book and read it, write a review, go on Amazon and do it for yourself. You will
absolutely
absolutely
do it for yourself. I think that's a good note to end this one on. Thank you so much. Of course, everyone should and must read this book and do it for themselves more than anything else. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.